asking your rivals why they thought you lost in July. You've actually already talked about this. You've put it down to public disagreements amongst the party's senior figures and leaders. Do you really believe that this was mainly a problem of indiscipline in the ranks?
Well, I've gone further than that, Trevor, to be fair. I've also said that it was failure to deliver. You know, we promised that migration would come down, it went up. We promised taxes would come down, it went up. And so, quite understandably, people have
living standards. Talk about living standards.
Yeah, he almost touched on a thing there, like, yeah, taxes going up, but for who, Chris Kamara?
Even then, broadly, in countries with higher taxation, even if poorer people have a higher tax than they could be, that's still a better country for people on lower incomes, because they're usually, unless something's gone really wrong, net beneficiaries of the state in the way that rich people aren't. So even if poorer people get taxed, they get back all of these different public services which should work properly. The issue, of course, is that they were taxing people higher than they usually would be under a Conservative government, and then they were using that money to give to Michelle Mone and Hancock's mate down the pub.
Yes. Yeah, but that's the thing. I think we could have a situation where you could have reasonably low tax on the poorest if you have a reasonable rate of tax on the richest, and we use our natural resources correctly and actually invest in ways that financially aid the country, like, I don't know, building a high-speed rail line from London to Manchester. That would be a thing we could do, apparently.
Record is. And we weren't able to communicate our successful record on universal credit or the amazing
successful.
Again, like, what's terrible about the last however many years? Oh yeah, of course, it's living standards. You know what, one of the really good successes of our time in government was when we made universal credit so shit and massively impacted living standards. And again, the living standards, not just of people out of work, but the 40% of universal credit claimants who were in work at the time, because you screwed up the labour market.
I mean, unless you're talking about the number of people you helped starve, I don't know that I would use the word success.
Exactly, like, unemployment was low, yet we still had crappy wages. We still had wage stagnation for an incredibly long time until, like, 2023, when wages actually started rising commensurately.
They had the temerity to send the Chancellor to the Paralympics and then get annoyed when they booed him when he was murdering them.
They did so much supply-side labour market reform. They casualised the workforce so much. We all hate our jobs. We hate interacting with the job market. It's a miserable kind of non-economy of financiers and sinecures and service industry bullshit and nothing else. Because all of the good industry has been stripped away. All of the unionisation has been stripped away. No one works to live anymore. They live to work at this point.
Talking of unions as well, did you see? Oh my God, it's on the Laura Koonsberg one. I saw the clip of Bobby J. Robert Jenrick going on about he wants the Tory party to be the trade union for the British people.
I did hear about that.
Which is one of the dumbest. Like, those already exist, right?
They're called
trade unions. We literally already have them, and you've done everything you can to try and undermine and destroy them.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Things on top of this as well. On top of this, like, he's saying, obviously mentioned that 40% of universal credit claimants are in work, and that's a consequence of their policy on the labour market, because they try to make the country as easy for employers as possible and as hardest for employees, because of course this is the dichotomy under capitalism, in which capital wants to pay workers as little as possible, and these people represent capital. That's the basics of the economy under capitalism. And they made it so shit. The wages were so bad and hours were so awful, and 0-hour contracts and casualised labour made it so you never got paid enough. So many people, like 40% of those claim universal credit, also had a fucking job at the same time. Again, and that's his fault. That's his government's fault.
Results we've had in education, or the fantastic results that Andy Street has delivered here in Birmingham, or that Ben Houtram has delivered in Teesside, because of infighting, because, forgive me, but the focus of the media, quite understandably, has been on that where we've drawn attention, and we've drawn attention to the infighting, not to the success.
Yeah,
so
but
the combination is
come on, Tom!
He's doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing that we just heard from James Cleverly. People were really annoyed because we were so good. No, they weren't. People didn't like the things you just mentioned, actually.
I think, first of all, the stats about school successes are kind of fudged. It's a little bit fudged, depends on which kind of metrics that you use, but the standards of how good the readers are doesn't help when the school roofs are collapsing because you cut all of the renovation projects for our schools and the public sphere is entirely collapsing because of your failure to invest. We had to get kids out of school immediately as soon as term started because there were fears that school roofs might actually fucking collapse, Tom. And on top of that, again, still failing to mention the biggest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars. They just don't live in the world in which they have to care what happens to regular living standards because they live in the lap of luxury, always have and always will. And that's why they don't ever interact with people who are at the sharp end of the failure on the economy. They look at a bunch of numbers on a graph, they say, oh, well, inflation is coming down and also GDP is slightly increasing very slowly. That means it's fine. When even though the GDP is only increasing because people are doing financial transactions, just bunging like bonds between each other and making some amount of transaction increasing GDP for nothing and creating no value. Or house prices are rising. That's it. That's where the growth is coming from in our emaciated and stripped back non-economy based entirely on air at this point and has been for the past 45 years.
Exactly. It's gotten even worse now because there are literally 0-hour contracts and fucking gig economy jobs. That's all that's available. It's not that's not an economy. That's a joke.
They think they should be re-elected after the biggest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars, off the back of the fact that, well, we did some things on universal credit, which, again, as I mentioned before, goes alongside the fact that this is people in work claiming this shit. That's his successful wins from 5 years of Conservative governance, from 14 years of Conservative governance, is we were shit to poor people and kids can read good in collapsing schools, whilst everybody's living standards have collapsed everywhere else apart from in the banking sector. Because the rich, they're doing fine. More billionaires than we've ever had. Absolutely laughing their way to the bank. Bankers' bonuses now uncapped. They can go rollick around as much as they want in the city, having their little fucking expensive breakfasts and cafe lattes from Pret a Manger. They don't have to fucking care, do they? Because that's the real economy as far as Tom's concerned. People who are up in, say, I don't know, Ashfield, who've been happily propagandized to that it's immigrants' fault, also hate them because they failed immigration too. So they're now swanning off to vote for the fascist party. Brilliant, love it. Great work, Tom. Great work, Conservative government. And they can't even admit it, even to themselves. On top of all of this as well, he also seems to think that the only thing that mattered was the fact that they were divided in government. Do you think that regular people working normal jobs were paying attention or caring about whether or not the ERG were properly voting on this motion on this particular day and that made you look disunited? No, come off it. No, people just care about the material conditions, right?
No, they care about whether James Cleverly was briefing against the Chancellor. Clearly. That's the only thing that people were talking about on building sites or in the office, right? The water cooler talk was who's been leaking to the papers again.
Actually, that's a really good summation from Ben there about their catastrophic failure governance. Tories believe in the small state except for pensioners who vote for them, deregulation except for the planning sector for the middle-class homeowners who vote for them, and low taxes except for the young people who will never vote for them. Very true.
But the public are not dimwits. They can understand that their political figures might argue. Are you seriously saying that what they were really fooled by was the appearance of squabbling, but they didn't pay attention to Partygate? They didn't pay attention to the trust budget. They didn't pay attention to the record levels of legal and illegal migration, and that wasn't what they voted about?
Trevor, I mentioned migration in my roundup.
Well, to be fair, I think some of them did vote about immigration.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's fine to pull it up, especially at the Conservative conference when it's clear that this is an issue. But when even the only touching on the economy that he goes with is just the trust mini budget, and that affected, like, specifically people with mortgages and people with private pensions and expensive private pensions, so that like endowment pensions rather than like defined contribution pension schemes. Like there are people with expensive retirement accounts and expensive houses. Like, sure, it's bad for them. It's definitely bad for them. But is it the end of the world?
I think you're being a little churlish on that point, just on the basis that it, in not direct ways, it affected virtually everybody, in the sense that it took out billions of pounds from the economy, which everyone kind of gets affected in more indirect ways by even relatively small economic pushes and pulls. So I think, whilst yes, it isn't the key factor in any of this, the trusts sort of damaging the economy thing, I think, did have an effect on everyday people. And of course, it's the implied effect. The fact that the media pushed it so much and it was so tumultuous that it brought their government down before the fucking lettuce rotted definitely has like an impact on how people think about this. So if the question is, why did people not vote for us? It doesn't even necessarily matter what the reality of the concrete conditions are. It's what people perceive the concrete condition to be.
I think that's fair. I just think that I wish that the big problem I have is that it makes it sound like the only economic failure of the Conservative government was just this one Liz Truss blip that was then over with after 30 days. But actually, the reality is that the reason why the economy is in the shit is because of David Cameron and George Osborne.
Well, exactly,
these are the real wreckers. Liz Truss happened, and it was obviously bad for everybody. But very specifically, the people who destroyed the economy and hollowed it out from the inside it was David Cameron. It was David Cameron and George Osborne is the singular person to blame for all of this. I think you're right. There were obviously plenty of, extra effects from the Liz Truss budget that weren't immediate. That was always going to be damaging to the economy. I think that's true. I think that is very true. And regular people have private pensions. Regular people have mortgages, and this was certainly going to be something that was going to be a massive effect on people. In fact, literally, the government had to spend huge amounts of new money, had to essentially print new money, create new money to bail out pension funds in an emergency quantitative easing package. And you know what? It is going to have plenty of knock-on effects, but the reason why people are describing Liz Truss's mini-budget as quote-unquote crashing the economy rather than talking about George Osborne hollowing out the economy is because when George Osborne hollowed out the economy, it affected poor people. And the biggest immediate impact of the mini-budget was homeowners and private pension holders, who are the absolute bedrock of the swing vote of this country. And of course, people who journalists know. It's people who journalists care about.
People who journalists know, people who are rich enough to own stakes in companies that affect people like Phillips. Yeah, those people are in service of a very small group of people in the country who are predominantly over the age of 60.
Or between the ages of 50 and 70, because mortgage holders really spike amongst the 50 to 70 group. It's why, actually, if you look at the biggest demographic of people who changed their vote from 2019 to 2024, it's people who are housing tenure is currently paying a mortgage. People who are already own occupiers, who already own the home and have had their mortgage paid off, they mostly stuck around with the Conservative Party. They're already claiming their pension. They don't have to care about losing pension provision because they're going to be dead probably pretty soon. And they've already paid for their house, so they don't have to care about mortgage rates. People who are about to get a mortgage are already in private rented accommodation, and George Osborne and Theresa Villiers saw to why the housing sector was screwed up, because they did quantitative easing that pushed up house prices for people already existing homeowners, but people who are going to get on the ladder are going to have a hard time flooring together a deposit. And Theresa Villiers constricted the housing supply at a time when they were increasing the money supply. This was always going to lead end in tragedy for people who are actually trying to get onto the housing ladder, rather protecting a cosseted generation of existing homeowners, where they specifically tried to manipulate low interest rates through austerity to keep these people's mortgage payments low, so that they continued voting Conservative. That's why Miliband lost. So there is just this kind of whirlwind of things that meant that these group of people kept voting Conservative until Liz Truss happened. Liz Truss happened, and then these people massively swing towards Labour, and that is basically the reason why the Conservatives lost the election. Let's be real.
Pretty much.
I agree, absolutely. And all of those issues come together and point to a party that had lost the trust of the British people. We need to restore trust. And the way we restore trust is by ending the culture of sleaze that sadly we've seen now infecting the Labour Party. And we need to make sure that we're...
When you say infecting the Labour Party, do you mean you infected them?
We need every party to be doing that, and we need it from the Conservative Party too. But it starts with making sure we get the right leadership, because as we all know, leaders matter, leaders count, and making sure we have the right leader changes the way our party will act.
Well, that's just really interesting. You're the first of your colleagues to admit that leaders matter. So let me try the same question with you. You served, or you're an MP under May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak. Who do you most blame for these failures?
Well, look, it's a combination. I'm not looking at any of those individuals particularly. I'm looking at the whole party.
Well, you just told me leadership matters. I'm just saying, which of these leaders made a mess of it? Well, made most of a mess of it?
Trevor, The truth is that each of them bear their own share of the responsibility. Each of them got things wrong. Each of them also had their successes. You know, I will always be proud of the way that Boris Johnson stood up against Putin in Ukraine. I'll always be impressed by the way he delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. Both of those are huge achievements. Now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're building on successes like that, building on the reality of delivery, rather than on, as you rightly cited, those errors that leaders have made over the last 4 years. I'm not here to litigate the past. That's the job of people like Anthony Seldon and historians. My job is to look to the future and to offer the country the leadership that we need to take us out of the place where we are and make sure we're delivering from.
All right. You're probably, of the four candidates, the least well known to the public because you've had the shortest ministerial
Well,
career.
my career was to keep the king's secrets, and I did my job.
Indeed. What is it about you that the public and party members should know that would make them feel that you are ready for this role? That, you know, they've seen Cleverly in big jobs, they've seen Kemi Badenoch in good big jobs. What is it that you offer?
You may not have seen the jobs, but that doesn't mean I haven't done them. I've helped to rebuild governance in Afghanistan, in the National Security Council. And
How'd that work out? You're going well. I haven't checked in 20 years. Is Afghanistan a beacon of hope and economic prosperity and democracy? Did we leave it in a good place, or did literal fucking nutcases with sandals start taking over the place the second we left? Moving on.
in the government in Helmand. I've spent years serving the public in various different ways, including standing up against dictators, against tyrants, when I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee. And as you know, that got me sanctioned by China, by Russia, and by Iran, a country that is now threatening us again. And I've been warning clearly.
How many times is this prick going to mention Iran?
For years, that the alliance of tyrants and dictatorships that we've seen growing over recent years is a direct threat.
But none of this explains how you would deal with the delivery problem that you've already talked about. Government didn't deliver. What tells us that you would do any better?
Well, the way I'd deliver is by leading. And frankly, what we've seen in recent years is an absence of
Policy?
leadership. Now,
Policy?
Absolute meaningless guff. I would deliver by leading.
You know who Tom Tugendhat is, right? Do you know what Tom Tugendhat is? It's Keir Starmer. He's just Keir Starmer. He's the same politician. If instead of I was head of the Crown Prosecution Service, it's I was in the army.
Yeah.
Instead of I'm going to be the change and bring about, and that's how I'll change the country, meaningless guff. It's I'm going to be the person who wins by leading, and I'm going to be a good leader by leading and leading things. Like, you're just meaningless guff. This is meaningless nonsense. This is just words. You're saying words.
Pablum.
Yeah, Pablum.
that I've had in the roles that I've performed over the last 25 years of public service to this country, in uniform and out, I have always offered leadership. I've always offered that direction, that example
Actually,
that we need to follow.
He sounds like somebody trying to oversell themselves at an interview for a very entry-level office job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what experience do you have in working as a team? Well, actually, when I was in Helmand province.
Yeah, we had to work as a team to negotiate UEDs all the time. But also, I found that I could work individually on my own initiative as well. You know, like it's one of those people. Yeah. Like, we need you to make tea and empty the fucking copier machine. Like, that's it. Like, chill.
It's Mark Corrigan vibes.
Yeah, it is.
How we achieve the results that this country needs. Because the truth is, this is a dangerous world. There are real threats out there, and there are real reforms we need to see. That's why I'm standing for leadership of this country, because this country matters.
OK, let me ask you this last question, which is really about character. And this is not, in a way, a personal question. It is Cameron, Etonian. Johnson, Etonian. Sunak, Wycomist. Tugendhat, St Paul's. Does the Conservative Party really need another posh boy leader from a great public school?
I told you it was going to be fucking personal.
Savage! Roasted.
But also,
I mean,
fair point. Fair
It's
point.
true.
Yeah. By the way, again, if you don't speak posh, Wycomist means attended Winchester College. That's what that means, in case you weren't posh enough to know that.
And lead, and you can judge me on the decisions my parents made 35 years ago, or you can judge me on the decisions I've made for the last 35 years. I think the decisions I've made for the last 35 years.
No, it's not. No, dickhead. It's not about your parents deciding to send you to a school. It's the advantages you've had from that, and the fact that you don't relate to people in the ordinary world. That's
As
the
we have
point.
seen,
Yeah.
we have seen from the fact that he can't even understand why they lost. Of course, like a posho public school boy, never had a real job in his life. He's never been somebody who's ever been financially uncomfortable. So he can't empathise.
No.
He can't empathise, right? Remember when Ian Dale on LBC was like, I thought it would be fine to close all of the ticket offices at the railway station, and then I became disabled. And immediately I changed my mind, and I'm just like, yeah, exactly. Conservatism, in its essence, is only thinking problems are problems if they affect you personally. That's it. That's all it is.
Absolutely.
Demonstrate the character that you're looking at. I have chosen consistently to serve our country. I put myself on the front line in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was injured in Iraq and I fought in Afghanistan. And these are decisions that I took. These are decisions I took to stand up and serve our country and to put myself at risk to do it. Now, I've done that consistently. I've done it for 25 years. And putting myself on the front line means that I have been sanctioned by China, I've been sanctioned by Russia, I've been sanctioned by Iran, and I've been threatened by all three. But I will never, ever go silent. This country matters too much. It matters too much to me. It matters too much to the whole world. We need to stand up for Britain, and I'm offering the leadership that will make a difference.
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.